Hey, Chandler here, and in this video I want to talk about how to negotiate and purchase a domain. Now, I've purchased a couple domains. I've actually purchased a lot, but there were two big ones, selfpublishingschool.com and selfpublishing.com, which obviously selfpublishing.com is a big one. And so once people found out that I've done that, I have friends and entrepreneurs that ask all the time, how do you do that? Like, how do you go about finding and purchasing a domain that you want? Now, there's the basic process, which is just going to GoDaddy and, if it's available, you can just purchase it there. That's simple, that's straightforward. If you're watching this video right now, you probably don't need that because someone owns the domain that you want and you want to get in touch with them, you want to buy this domain. Now, I'm going to separate this a little bit. And so there's a difference between buying a domain and buying a website. So like a full-on website. And then there's even a difference between buying a website and buying a website that also has a full business around it. So I'm not possibly going to be able to cover all those things. So I'll have a different video that's about strategic partnerships. I'll probably record that and all that stuff. But and there will be some overlap, but I really want to focus on just a domain. Right? Just a domain, or maybe it has a little bit of content, but it's not like a full-fledged, legit website, but it's mostly just a domain. So I'm going to walk through kind of the overarching principles and how do you go from I want that to I own that. So first, you got to figure out who owns this domain and is it worth anything? So we'll start with who owns this. And there's a lot of different sites, obviously GoDaddy and other sites, they want you to work through them. But usually if you do a who is lookup, or if you do some sleuthing around the internet, you look at the contact page, if that's there, usually you can do some digging and either through who it's registered with or something like that, you can find out who owns this. You might also look at, if it's a big domain, who owns the Twitter account, who owns the Facebook account or the pages connected to that. You might be able to reach out to that person that way. But somehow, some way, you'll probably be able to figure out who owns this, right? So that's how those are a couple tips. Who is lookup. You can find that, just Google that, you'll find that. That's one of the simplest ways, but sometimes people hide their identity because they don't want people reaching out to them like you're gonna do. And so, you might have to do some sleuthing and be creative about it. Worst case scenario, you can contact through GoDaddy or through a brokerage and make an offer. And sometimes that's the way to do it. Make an offer if it's a lower level domain. So if it's $1,000 or less, like that can be easy, simple, fast, no problem. But if we're getting into the bigger domains, so maybe it's worth 5 to 10 grand, or even as much as 100 grand, or maybe it's worth $1 million or 2 million. That's crazy. You're definitely going to need to watch this video. But you kind of want to figure that out. So who owns it, and then now how much is it worth? And so how do I know if it's worth less than $1,000 or if it's worth 5, 10 grand, or really, unless you're going after a 4-letter domain. And 4-letter, in a lot of cases, it's a real word that people want to own. So it might be books.com. It might be publishing.com, right? Like those are, the shorter the domain, the higher the value. Now, outside of that, there's a couple of helpful tools. So if you just Google domain value calculator, you're gonna find all kinds of them. There's GoDaddy, there's Estabot, there's a bunch of others. And what I like to do is find all the popular ones and go through 2 to 5 of them to just get a ballpark on what this is worth. Now, here's the thing. These are pretty much meaningless, right? Like at the end of the day, all that matters is what is the seller willing to sell it for and what are you willing to pay for it? That, like at the end of the day, all deals come down to that. Like what is this worth to that person? Are there other buyers or other demand and competition is supply and demand? And what am I willing to pay for it? Now, that's the process of what I'm going to teach you, just really getting to a number that you're both willing to pay. So for starters, I like to go through those estimates, kind of see what it's worth, and then I'll dive into the offer process and the purchase process. So now you're starting to figure out, is this domain worth anything? Who owns it? You're kind of doing some exploration. And again, if it's $1,000 or less, you can just make an offer. Maybe that's the fastest way. But I want to give a quick caveat here. Do not hire a domain broker. And this is in almost all cases, there's very few exceptions, but think about this. So the broker is incentivized for you to pay the most amount of money possible for that domain because they get a percentage of the sale. So their incentives are not aligned. When you win, they win less. Now, sure, they're motivated to help you get a deal, but just know that a lot of times that's going to drive up the price. So I try to avoid domain brokers if at all possible and go straight to the seller. Now, the only exception to that is if you're a big company, if you're a big name and you know that if the seller knows who I am, they're going to charge more, right? And I've run into this, and I'll talk about this a little bit later in the video, but that's the only exception. Otherwise, don't use a broker. So now that you figure out who owns this, we got to get in touch with them. And so obviously you can email them. If you can find their phone number, you can text and call them. But usually emailing is going to be your first step. And my number one goal is to get them on the phone as fast as possible. I want to show them that I'm serious. I want to stand out from the crowd, but then I want to find a reason to get on the phone. Now here's the thing. People are not going to want to get on the phone with you. They're just going to want to say, how much are you offering? All right? Especially if it's a valuable domain. Maybe they get hit up all the time on this domain. So they're probably going to kind of shoo you away unless they just don't get many offers. But my goal is to get on the phone. Why? Because I want to stand out. And I want to be able to ask them deep and meaningful questions to help calculate my offer. I mean, this is negotiation 101. You never offer first. So I want to kind of feel them out and figure out what are they willing to accept for this. And I might throw in some of the estimators. I say, hey, here's the ballpark if they're really pressuring me on that. I might say, hey, I've done some research. Here's what I've found. I was kind of thinking in this ballpark. Do you want to chat further? Again, but I'm only going to do that if they're really pressuring me for a number. But my goal is to get on the phone as fast as possible. And then when I get on the phone, I'm going to ask them a few key questions. And really there's 5 main questions I'm going to ask on this phone call to figure out how motivated is this person to sell this and what is the approximate ballpark of what they'd take for it. So question number 1, how long have you had it? Right? Is this something that they bought recently? Is something that they've had for a while? I'm just kind of, getting the conversation rolling, and it's an easy answer. We're getting kind of building this pattern where I'm asking you a question and then they're answering it. It's an easy piece of information that they're willing to give up. It's not sensitive information, so I'm starting with that. Number 2, why'd you buy it? And this is where, you can build kind of human-to-human connection. Like, hey, why'd you buy this? Like, did you buy it to resell it? Did you buy it to use it? Those are 2 very different conversations. And if someone bought it to use it, I'm gonna have to sell them on giving up that dream that they probably had when they bought it. Or maybe they say, yeah, I bought it. I was planning on using it, but I know I don't want to use it anymore. And I just don't have the time, blah, blah, blah. That also tells me valuable information. They no longer need this, so it's worth less to them. Right? And also, like, if you ever watch The Prophet, it's one of my favorite TV shows. Marcus Lemonis, this is one of the first questions he asks when he goes in to buy a business. He's like, hey, why'd you start this business? Like, tell me about that. And so you're opening up and you're getting conversation like, oh man, that's super interesting. And so now all of a sudden, like, we're building human-to-human rapport, which is at the end of this conversation is going to help us build a relationship, but also help you get a better price for this domain. So I'm asking, why did you buy it? And it's going to tell me a lot. Number 3, and this is kind of related, are you planning on doing anything with it? Right? So if I haven't uncovered that already, I want to very specifically ask that. Like, hey, is there a future plan to do something with this? Are you already doing something with this that's important or vital to you or vital to your family or your business? Like, what are the emotional connections and the emotional attachments to this thing? Because as much as we like to think people make logical decisions, people make emotional decisions and they justify them logically. And even if you're a logical decision maker, you bought that sports car because it makes you feel cool. Not because it goes fast or not because, the gas mileage is great or the crash test rating was so amazing, right? Like those are all the things that you say after the fact to justify that emotional purchase. So in the same way, I want to target the emotions of the seller and really get clear like, hey, are you going to do anything with this? And I'm looking for landmines. Like, are there emotional attachments to this that would keep this person from selling? Number 4, and this is one of my favorite questions, is how interested are you in selling this? And within this question, and this is one of my favorite things to do, if you've been around me for a while, you know this, is, hey, scale of 1 to 10. I always ask people to rate stuff scale of 1 to 10. So, hey, scale of 1 to 10, how good was this meeting? Or in this case, scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in selling this? And people will skirt around this question. It's like,
I don't need to sell it. I could sell it. I also couldn't. It depends on the price.
Obviously, if you pay enough, I'm happy to sell it, right?
They're going to try to push you off. But then I just start, hey, actually, really, and I'll make a joke, I'll laugh, kind of just be playful with it and say, hey, for real, like, what are you thinking? Like, is this a 3? Is this like, I don't want to sell it, I'm holding on to this. This means a lot to me, my business, my family. Like, I'm still really want to do this. Is this a 9? Like, can't wait to sell it. I need the money. Let's do this. And I'll be playful and I'll make jokes around it, but I really want them to give me a number and crystallize a number, but then also hear the emotions around that number. And then number 5, and this is one of the most important ones, I think, especially towards the end of the conversation, is have you gotten any offers for this domain? This is kind of a 2 or 3 part question. So have you gotten any offers for this domain? Have you gotten any recent offers for this domain? Because that might have been an offer 5 years ago and they're like, oh man, I should have taken that. And then the third question is, what were they? What were the offers? Now, this is where you're going to have to navigate the conversation. A lot of people will not want to tell you this. They'll say, oh yeah, I can't say that. They might even get a little bit standoffish, like now all of a sudden you're asking for sensitive information. But I want to know. And I'll keep the conversation. If they don't answer, I'll be like, oh yeah, totally understand. If I were you, I probably wouldn't want to answer that either. What are you thinking? Like, what are you thinking it's worth? I'll deflect and then I'll circle back. So have there been some serious offers? Like, who am I competing against? And so I'll just ask the same question in a different way. And I'll have 3 to 5 ways that I can re-ask this question. But it's Aikido, right? If they're resisting me, I want to deflect that energy and not go head on with it and say, well, you got to tell me or I'm not making an offer, right? Then the conversation's at a standstill. So I want to deflect that negativity or maybe that resistance and say, oh, cool, yeah, no problem. So let me ask you this. And that's my favorite follow-up question. Let me ask you this. Is there someone else that's offering right now? Let me ask you this. Have you gotten offers in the past that you wish you would have taken? Let me ask you this. What would it take? Like, what's your magic number where you're like, yeah, I'd sell it for that, right? And so I'm just using that bridge phrase of let me ask you this, and then I'm following back up and asking pretty much the same question, but in a different way. All right, so that's how you handle the phone conversation, how to have a good conversation. So now we're getting to the offer. Like this is where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of people want to get to that process as quickly as possible, get yes, no, and just know that the seller is probably going to be that same way. But we're really uncovering this through the phone conversation. And as you just noticed, I want to get them to tell me their magic number. And I want to get them to tell me a range that they're looking at and never offer first. So preferably when I get to this point and I'm about to make the offer, I know kind of ballpark. Oh, they've gotten an offer for $1,000 on this. They said no. And their magic number is like 3 to 10 grand. And usually people will give you that range and I'll work from the bottom of that range and then I'll go below that range, right? So you're kind of getting to what is this worth for you? And then what are they willing to sell this for? And so those are the two pieces of the pie that I can't tell you how to figure out what this is worth for you, but you're really kind of trying to figure out what are they willing to sell it for, and then looking at, okay, is this that important? Like what's the economic impact to my business? Or like what does this really mean to me? And chances are you're going to overvalue it in the moment. So don't get caught up in kind of the hype, the hysteria, the emotion. Remember, you're emotional too, just like they are. So you don't want to make an emotional decision that you later can't justify by the logic of how much you have to pay. So we're sifting through that, and then we're making an offer based on those two things. Now we've made an offer. Maybe we're close. Maybe we're far off. Like, what do we do if they just say, no, I'm not interested? How do we get them to actually agree on this offer? So then this becomes kind of the negotiation process. Now, one of the most common things that I see here, and this probably has happened to you or will happen to you, and maybe it's already happened, and that's why you're watching this video, is the seller thinks it's worth way more than it actually is. So then we're kind of now going through this process of bringing them down from this really high number. And there's no exact way to do this. Like you've just got to navigate this and say, I would go back to, hey, but okay, this is a little weird. You said like you were an 8 or 9 out of 10 interested in selling this and that your magic number was actually closer to here, but it sounds like this isn't really worth anything to you. Like, so why the resistance? Like, what would help us come together? How can we bridge the gap? Like, what would it be to make you say yes, right? Like, what do you need me to say? And this is where you can get creative. So this is, I'm not going to go too far into this, but I think it's really helpful to cover, which is everyone has a magic number. And it's not about the actual number, it's about the terms. So if I can't get someone to agree on the number, I'm going to try to renegotiate the terms. So if I'm thinking I'm willing to pay 20 grand for this, and they're thinking I need 50 grand for this, well then there's always a way to bridge the gap, and it's usually through the terms. So this is where you can get creative on terms. I can say, okay, well, what if I pay 30 grand spread out over 5 years? Right? So now all of a sudden I don't have to spend all this money up front. Or what if I pay 20 grand, but then I'll give you 5% of revenue generated from this domain over the next 6 months, 12 months, right? So now all of a sudden they're motivated to help you succeed and they win when you win. So what we're kind of doing, and this is, basic deal theory, is we're maximizing our upside and we're minimizing our downside. So that's a question you should ask here at this point as well, is how do I maximize my upside and minimize my downside? So maybe I can get to a number that's 50 grand, but it requires me doing 500K in revenue over the first year from this domain, or it requires X, Y, Z. And this is where you can really get creative, and you want to circle back and ask the question, what's important to you? Like, what about this is important to you and what matters to you? And you might find out that they want to be able to say that they sold it for X amount, right? So now I'm going to help them get to that number. It just might be a little bit creative and there's going to be no guarantees, right? But if they want to be able to say, hey, I sold it for 6 figures. Well, we're going to have a 6-figure deal, maybe if I can get to that, but just the terms are going to make sure that if I'm paying 6 figures, I am definitely winning, right? And this is a good deal for me. So you can get to a good deal. And I think this is one of the most helpful things I learned from my buddy Nathan Latka. He's one of the best deal makers that I know. It's not so much about the price, it's about the terms. And the best negotiators, the best deal makers know that. And they know they have, 5 to 50 different terms that they could add in, pull out, whatever. They could do those things, and it's not about the actual price. They're going to be able to get to that price through the right terms. All right, so you've been through all this, and they're still saying no. Maybe they're saying, I'm not interested. Maybe they blew you off. Maybe they're not even responding anymore. And trust me, this has happened to me many times. With the 2 domains I mentioned, I had to follow up with those people over and over and over again. So just know that the best time to buy is when you don't need it, which is probably not helpful because you're probably watching this video because you need it. But think about like, hey, could I spread this out over 9 months, over 12 months, over a year? And I just want to keep checking back in. And I'll tell you right now, there are multiple domains and multiple websites that just every month or every 3 months, I'm checking back in. Maybe I'm sending them a gift. Maybe I'm sending them an email like, hey, are you interested in selling? Like, you want to talk again? Let me know. Like, I want to let people know as soon as you reconsider, you reach out to me, right? And that's easy to do when you don't need it. But what if you really do need it? Well, then you're going to want to creatively attack re-engaging this deal. And my goal is to get in person, or I call it go nuclear. And this is definitely like, you save this till the end. So do not go nuclear in the beginning of the deal making process. It's like, hey, what are the trump cards that you have in your pocket that it's like, hey, I know that I can say this if I need to. So I'll just be very transparent here. Selfpublishingschool.com, I got all the way to the end and I couldn't get this person to agree on a price. And this person was like, oh, I'm not even that motivated to sell it. I want to do something with it at some point. So I knew now all of a sudden, this person knows that I own Self-Publishing School. So again, if they know who you are, they're probably going to charge more if it's important to you. And so he says, maybe I want to do something with this one day. And so I saved my trump card till the end. I said, hey, look, here's the deal. I've got Self-Publishing School trademarked. You can't use it, right? So it doesn't matter that you have it. You can't use the domain because I've got the trademark. And he said, well, oh, that makes this really valuable to you. And so that was his kind of argument is, oh man, that means this is important to you and it's worth more. And I said, actually, the opposite is true. That means it's way less valuable for you because nobody else can buy it, right? So you can't sell it to anyone but me. So it's worth less because there's no other captive audience. You can't use it and you can't sell it to anyone else. And he said, oh shoot, you got a good point. Okay, I guess I'll sell it to you, right? And so, but that's the going nuclear. I'm never gonna say that in the first email and the first phone call or all those things. I'm gonna build rapport, I'm gonna build a relationship. And that's just, okay, if this person's really difficult or this is kind of my Hail Mary at the end, I'm gonna do that. Now here's another example with selfpublishing.com. That's a big domain. And people are always like, oh my gosh, how did you negotiate the purchase of that domain? And the truth is, I navigated kind of between, I was thinking about buying the business, I was thinking about buying the domain, they had other domains, so I was thinking about buying this domain, and then I could help them build up other properties because we have skill sets in content marketing, SEO, all that stuff. And so I was kind of navigating it, but at the end of the day, I'm like, I want to own selfpublishing.com. And I'm going to figure out the terms to get there. We were way different on price. And it's like, hey, you're not even close. Come back if you're willing to double or triple that offer. You've probably heard these things before if you're trying to buy a domain. And so finally, I'm like, oh man, I got to get back in this conversation. They're not hardly taking my phone calls. They're not responding to my emails. Like, unless you have a much better price, let me know what that is and then we'll talk, right? Maybe you've gotten that objection. So I said, all right, I've got to get in person. Like, I've got to figure out how, if I get in person with these people, I think that I can make some headway here, and at a minimum, we'll make progress. Maybe it doesn't happen, all those things. So these people were based out of New York City. So I used kind of another, in my bag of tricks, this is something I learned from a friend of mine. He's like, anytime you want to meet someone, you say, hey, I've got a trip planned to this city. I'm thinking about this date or this date. Which one works better for you? And the truth is that they're the reason that you're planning a trip to that city, but maybe they don't know that, right? And you're figuring out when they say yes to a weekend, so you're giving them multiple options or a weekday or whatever the date is, then you book that trip. And so I did that. I said, hey, I've got a trip planned in New York City. I'm thinking about here or here. When works for you? So now all of a sudden they're like, oh shoot, this guy's serious. Like he's flying out to meet us. And the truth is, I just wanted to go back to New York City. I hadn't been there in a long time. And I wanted to revive this deal. So I'm thinking, all right, win-win. I get to see the city and I'm going to fly out and we're going to make some serious progress. So I did that. I took a red eye, had an all-day meeting. We came close to a purchase agreement, pretty much. There was just a couple things that we needed to work out. But then the deal almost fell through. You get it back on the line and you got to go through all those things. But the end result was I negotiated the purchase of the domain. And in this case, I figured out terms, which is the payment plan. So lump sum upfront and then payments over XML. I added other things in the deal. There's other assets that you might be able to look at. So these are just other things. As you're thinking through terms, like think about, are there other assets that these folks own? Maybe it's the Twitter account, the Facebook account. Maybe they have an email list that they can add in. Maybe they have a customer list. Like all those things can add value to the deal for you and help you get to the price that maybe they want. Or you might be able to spread out the terms and that helps you get to the end result, which is a deal that both people are happy about. So there you have it. That's how you negotiate a purchase on a domain. How do you figure out what it's worth? How do you find who owns it? How do you get on the phone as quickly as possible? How do you come to terms, make an offer? What do you do if they say no, if they ignore you? And hopefully you find this helpful. So what I'd love for you to do is comment below this video right now. Let me know. One of two things. Number one, what was your biggest takeaway or what was most helpful for you in this video? Or, and this could be super helpful for everyone watching this video, is number two, how have you done this successfully? If you have any tips, any strategies, maybe you hate some things I said in this video, awesome, let me know. Maybe you love some things I said in this video, great, share that. But what have you seen work for you? And no theories here, like what have you actually done? If you've purchased a domain, what's worked well? Comment below right now, let me know, seriously. Take 2 minutes right now, comment below, let me know, click the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, so to the YouTube channel, to the podcast, and I'll see you in the next video. Talk soon.